What's up, guys? This is Sean from the Lineup Logic NBA DFS podcast. I'm getting a lot of questions about tools and understanding how to use different tools that we use for research on the podcast. Just want to give you guys another video in the tools series here, the Toolkit series, to try and help you understand, what you can do to dive into a little bit of extra research on yourself. We're going to talk about injuries and on-offs right now. So there's a couple different websites that I like to use when I'm trying to determine what happens when a certain player is injured or a team is going to be missing someone or someone else is going to be starting, whatever the case may be. We have that a lot, but it's not always the best call, right? To just roster the next guy up. So sometimes we need to investigate what's going to happen when a certain player sits. Why do you want to roster someone when someone else is out? So one great website, independent website, I love this site, NBA Wowie. Wowie stands for with or without. Pretty straightforward. The other one is RotoGrinders Court IQ. Maybe you've used it before. It's a really nice tool that RotoGrinders uses. It's just recently upgraded, so it's even better. And then my buddy over at Fantasy 5x5 has a really nice, kind of easy to read graphic for on-off. That makes life pretty easy. So let's go ahead and dive into how these things work. For example, let's look into what's going to happen now to the Kings without Barnes, without Cousins, all this changing of the guard as we see it over in Sacramento. Maybe we're going to want to target some players, but we're going to want to be cautious about the situation. So let's take a look. On NBA Wowie, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go down to the Sacramento Kings. You're going to select the Kings. Okay. And it's going to basically ask you, where do you want it in the season? I want the regular season. And I'm going to select off here. I'm going to say, okay, we know that DeMarcus Cousins is off. We know that Garrett Temple is off. We know that Omri Caspi is off because he's off the team now. We know that Rudy Gay is injured. We know that, geez Louise, the Kings are looking pretty thin right now. Matt Barnes is going to be released and probably picked up immediately by someone who's a contender. That's it. Okay, so great. Okay, so all these guys are off the court. Let's figure out what's going to happen. I'm going to click the submit page. Okay, and it's going to run the query. Okay, what's great here to do is you're going to immediately be able to see scoring, shooting, etc. Okay, this is the usage number. Okay, scoring index is actually, does it have a positive effect or a negative effect on them? And their scoring index, are they positively affected by offensively? Okay, the way that there's the first thing to notice is that the way that this is sorted is by minutes. So the person who takes on the biggest minutes bumps are Tolliver, McLemore, and Cauley Stein on down the line, okay? Then we're going to look at who this affects the most positively from a usage perspective and a scoring index perspective. So from a scoring index perspective, Malachi Richardson, but the minutes aren't there, right? So let's look. Okay, here we go. Here's one of our minutes guys. Willie Cauley-Stein has a positive scoring index, as does Aaron Aflalo. So maybe it's interesting to think about Willie Cauley-Stein now coming up in this situation. From a usage perspective, we're going to sort to the top here. It's Malachi Richardson, interestingly enough. He has a 20% usage rate. Didn't see that coming. Maybe it's something to keep in mind. Okay. But the other thing that we want to look at is this, fantasy. What we can quickly understand is who averages the most fantasy points per minute without these guys on the floor. Well, Malachi Richardson maybe, but he's not really getting a lot of minutes. I do know, however, that Ty Lawson and Darren Collison are getting a lot of minutes. So I'm going to keep them in mind for sure as this goes forward. Costa Kufos takes a nice bump there as well, as we saw, Willie Cauley-Stein. Those are my leaders, right? So I can keep all of those guys in play, right? As I look forward to, trying to roster maybe some of these Kings in a value situation. Now, Court IQ is really nice because similarly, I'm going to drop down and I'm going to go to Sacramento. I'm going to go with just off here. I'm going to go Barnes off, Cousins off, Temple off, and Omri Caspi off, and Rudy Gay off. Okay, so let's run that query. Let's see what we got. Okay, so the nice thing about Court IQ is it's sortable. It's a little bit more visually appealing than NBA Wowie. It doesn't quite have all the stuff that NBA Wowie has. Like NBA Wowie has different shot type, ball handling, turnovers, all that kind of thing, you know, and how it affects the opponent too, by the way. That's really nice. However, Roto Grinders is pretty easy to read. You're going to, again, see it sorted by minutes. Okay, Tolliver there at the top of the minutes. Macklemore, we know, follow Willie Cauley-Stein as well. Okay, but then you can sort here by usage. Collison, we know Collison has a big usage bump. You can also source by most fantasy points per minute, right? Malachi Richardson. Papagiannis, he doesn't get any minutes because you can see 10 minutes, right? But Ty Lawson, Willie Cauley-Stein, pretty respectable. And you see who gets the biggest bumps down here, which is the differentials, which is really nice. So +4 usage bump for Collison, +6 for Aflalo. That's pretty big. And it actually, interestingly enough, seems to have a negative effect on Collison. That's probably because his assist rate goes down. And we can look over here and we can see, yep, his assist rate goes down without those guys on the floor. Makes sense. The offense is less efficient, right? So, you know, Collison may be one of the, may struggle, but we'll know a little bit more as these games start to take place and we have a larger sample size than, you know, just a couple minutes on the season without these guys because they really haven't played a lot without these guys. Now, Fantasy 5x5 is just as easy to use, a little bit quicker. We're going to look into what happens just with Cousins off the floor, for example. Cousins off the floor, did not play mode. So when DeMarcus Cousins is off the floor, we see that Anthony Tolliver gets a bump, Willie Cauley-Stein gets a bump, Barnes isn't there, so not relevant. Collison maybe gets a bump. Okay. Garrett Temple gets a bump. This is a really quick and easy way to see how many fantasy points people are scoring. But here's the nice thing. You can switch this to minutes too, right? Let's switch it over to minutes. I want to know who gets the minutes when Cousins is out. Well, it makes a lot of sense, guys. It's Tolliver and it's Willie Cauley-Stein. Caspi, not there anymore, and Ben McLemore, which is kind of recently what we saw. We saw Ben McLemore coming into some more minutes. Tolliver, you know, Cauley-Stein in that game, that suspension game, he was in there. He was out on the floor. So makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Really easy to read these charts over here at Fantasy 5x5, right? So this is the thing. You have to be certain that a situation, and I'll talk about it on the podcast, but you have to be certain that a situation is actually beneficial for a guy who's going to be slated to start or someone else on the team, because it's not always the case that the person who's going to start over him is actually going to be the better beneficiary. For example, Josh Fernandez, my co-host, talks about this a lot. The beneficiary of when Anthony Davis is off the floor, it's funny that we're talking about Davis today as well, but the beneficiary when Davis is off the floor isn't usually actually Terrence Jones who will get the start. He's one of them, but it's also Jrue Holiday. When Davis doesn't play, Holiday takes on a massive offensive load, right? Terrence Jones obviously very close because he usually gets that huge minutes bump, okay, as does Tyreek Evans. However, Holiday takes the biggest bump and he has the biggest offensive load. So it's not really that you're looking to necessarily roster Terrence Jones, although he's not a bad play, but maybe Holiday is a much more solid play given matchup, etc. So you have to look into these kinds of things when you're trying to figure out how you're going to fill in for an injury. All right, that's it. Hit me up with on Twitter with any questions about how to use these tools, and I'll see you guys after the All-Star break.